All right, so it is 9/11. This is our dual credit history class, and we are going to discuss the anniversary of 9/11 today at the end of the lecture. But first off, we're going to go through some more of our content regarding the progressive era. So remember, the theme of the progressive era is reform, change, 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 change to the nation, especially regarding matters social and political. So what's this picture we see here?
NAACP welcoming everybody,
Everybody.
who felt oppressed to, because the goal of the NAACP was to
African American.
give African rights.
Is it National African?
No, they didn't say African American back then. They said color people. That was the vernacular.
What was the
National Association, something colored people.
Advancement of colored people.
Advancement of colored
Yeah. So as you can tell, whenever we talk about terminology that has to do with race, it changes over time. And so back then, colored people was the polite way to say black people. If you say that now, you're really not going to get a good response. So be mindful of that. So we were talking about things that had to do with race last time, and of course, remember we talked about and we read Booker T. Washington. He had an answer to what he saw as the problem of racism, where he was talking about enduring the hardship, turning the other cheek, living a productive American Christian life, and eventually converting the racist to accept you. And you could say that there's historical evidence that this worked. I mean, it worked for the Christians in Rome and so on and so forth. And later, it's going to work for the fall of the British Empire in India through acts of people such as Gandhi. And so it makes sense, right? So here's our first person up here, Ida B. Wells, journalist who wrote on the problems regarding segregation in schools. So remember we read the dissent in Plessy versus Ferguson, and we discussed it in Plessy versus Ferguson. The Supreme Court ruled that it was okay to have separate facilities and services for African Americans and other people of other races, provided that it was equal. The thing is, though, equality is one of those things that's it's kind of like it's up for you to interpret. So we see that quality is not always included with equality. So a lot of African American schools, and of course, like in South Texas, like Hispanic schools, had problems where they had very old or rotten or no textbooks. The schoolhouses were in disrepair. Often they could have no heating in the winter. The teachers were not always very well trained. It was a lot of problems. And of course, the horrors of lynching. As we may have discussed before, lynching was using mob justice to execute somebody, right? And so the mob's idea of justice is fickle. Here in American history, often lynching was a form of violent racism. Though it did cross the color barrier, it was primarily African Americans, and it was done usually on the pretext of an allegation of a crime. But afterwards, though, through investigation, you find that usually there's no evidence to support it, so somebody died for no reason. And the form of death was usually through terrible forms of torture. Everything from people having their body parts cut off while they're alive to being burnt to death. Terrible stuff. She's going to help lead the founding of the National Association of Colored Women in 1896 and help the founding of the NAACP. Again, that's the National Association for Advancement of Colored People. And they're still around today as a political organization and also as an advocacy group, and I think as a legal protection group too. So this person, he's kind of like W.E.B. Du Bois. He's going to be somebody who's he's going to be in opposition to Booker T. Washington. In some ways, you could kind of parallel the two in historical figures that will come up later. You could kind of compare Booker T to Martin Luther King Jr. and Du Bois with maybe Malcolm X in some ways.
Who?
Malcolm X. He's going to be, we'll talk about him when we talk about the civil rights movement later, but he's going to be one of the leaders in a group called the Nation of Islam. It's going to call for very, not necessarily violent, but very assertive, counter-racist arguments during the civil rights movement. So it's basically, they were often accused with answering racism with racism. Get to that later. He was a very good speaker, though. So Du Bois was a historian and a sociologist, and this is when sociology was still really new, who helped found the NAACP. And of course, if you don't remember, sociology is it's related to psychology, where instead of just studying individuals, you study groups. But it's a lot less scientifically grounded than psychology. So it's often used today for, market research and stuff like that, and also political research. Encourage the education of African Americans and the assertion of their civil rights. So he was kind of like, hey, African Americans need to pull themselves up on their own. You don't need to, he in some ways called for separation from whites, and like assertion. It means like, don't sit there and accept racism and Jim Crow and things like that. Whereas Booker T was like, remember, turn the other cheek. So, okay. Booker T. Washington. Apparently I used this picture twice. Talked a little bit about him. He was born a slave and then worked as a coal miner as a young man. Put himself through college and went on to found the Tuskegee University in 1881. He called for African Americans to pull themselves up through hard work and showed that racism was wrong by living a good example. He's going to be a very popular American figure. He's going to actually befriend quite a few of those captains of industry that we talked about earlier and get a lot of funding to help out with African Americans. He's a very eloquent speaker. He was a very well published author. So he was a very safe, self-made man. And so a lot of people saw him as a good example, right? He was a workaholic too, very devout Christian. Below that, we have muckrakers. Remember, that was one of our definitions. So journalists and authors who call for reform, both social and governmental. Those sensationalists, so they're sensationalists, right? So they make their stories sound really outlandish and crazy. Because, like clickbait, they're trying to make you to buy that magazine or that newspaper. So kind of like how clickbait really wants you to click that link, So they brought attention, though, to poor working conditions, municipal mismanagement. So the problems with cities, right? From city workers to politicians in cities. Child labor, education, and inequality of wealth. So this is a time period where most of the money was in the hands of very few people. We're kind of reaching a point like that again. So, however, the thing is, people always disagree on is how does it happen and how you could fix it. But,
So which were the
mhm.
barren people that he made friends with? I feel like
Carnegie for sure.
you already wrote down Muckrakers.
Muckrakers, yeah, right. Yeah, if you already got something, don't write it down again. So I don't know. I haven't read his biography in like 15 years, but I know Carnegie was one of them. But there was quite a few. He would go make visits, and he made it a very strong point to where how he was really good at getting donations or getting his school built and stuff like that was he would go up to these businessmen and he tried to think how they thought. It's like, if I was a businessman, I'd be a real by the numbers guy. So he would come up with very detailed list on how much things would cost. Now, do you ever watch Shark Tank? So he kind of did like the Shark Tank thing. He would try to memorize everything he needs to know about his school, like a business. And so when they asked questions, he like has the answer right then and there. He was popping out the numbers, because he knew that that's what businessmen wanted to hear. And so they really liked that, So it's like the first Shark Tank.
First shark.
But he's the one who always gets a good deal. So, yeah. I used to like watching that show. I don't really watch TV right now.
Don't like watching that show.
No, I used to like watching it sometimes. And okay, I'm not gonna say like, but I could sit through it. Does that make sense? Okay,
Yeah.
I wouldn't hunt for it. Now if it's on, I'd be like, oh, okay, I would do that. That's dumb brother, So.
Yeah.
Or that's my idea. They took my idea,
There's a lot of shows that I feel like I could do that with that I like wouldn't go out and watch, but like go out of my way to watch, but
Mhm.
that I would watch.
Mhm. I think the last show that I really kind of liked watching was Live PD, but I think they pulled that because people hate cops now. But I used to love Live PD.
They pulled Paw Patrol too.
Wait, for
Did you
real?
know that? What?
That's
For real?
hilarious.
I heard something about it. I was like,
They actually don't. They cut Paw Patrol from being aired in TV. They don't show it anymore on TV.
Okay, so I
Because it's
had
about
a good
a little cop dog.
uh-huh.
and it's just gone now.
What?
It's not up here. I got my pen and some highlighters. But that's about it. I should probably clean up my areas. You lost the mechanical pen. You probably threw it away with your lunch.
Oh Lord, that would be annoying.
Do you want one? What do you want? I have one and I haven't even used.
I thought you were ticking away at your phone.
I would lose it. Yeah, I am. I just wanted to draw or something.
Or something. Oh yeah, that's for a good use of your time.
Purple, though.
Oh wait, wrong
Wait,
one.
I'm almost done. Wait.
I don't wanna lose it.
Okay, I have another one.
It's a great use of my time this morning.
Okay. Hey, but what's funny about this time period is so many of the things that happen in some ways are kind of happening now. Like I was telling you about the wealth going back in the hands of the wealthy, a resurgence in violent rioting, even race rioting is going to become a really big thing during this time period. Domestic terrorists bombing places. Like there was for a long time, there was like once a month, New York had a terrorist bombing.
And see, here's my warm-ups.
Good job.
I should write it down right now.
So a lot of these things kind of like repeat themselves for different reasons.
Let's see, that would be 9/4, right?
Sounds like a date on the calendar. All right, let's move on. So, okay. Hey, there's something. Speaking of, what on earth is this?
Octopus.
An octopus. What does it say on the octopus?
Standard oil.
Standard Oil. That is going to be a major oil monopoly. And its tentacles are all over the place. Where are those tentacles?
Washington.
Yeah.
That looks like.
Capitol Hill, too. Look, it's going towards the House. It's like, so it's got like the Senate. It's got the presidency. It's got whoever these guys are. I don't know.
Probably the con workers.
Maybe. Yeah, so I mean, like, it's like everywhere. And see, like Standard Oil, a lot of people liked it because once it became the only kid on the block, oil prices kind of went down for the consumer. The bad thing is because it drove out all competition, there was a big danger there that prices could skyrocket, right?
So like,
Mhm.
what time period was that in?
1890s, I think. So, yep. All right. So, the Populist Party. Largely, we already talked about the progressive movement. Progressives they're going to kind of make a political party and kind of not, right? We're going to get to that in a minute. We're kind of jumping ahead with the Progressive Party, which is really, most people know it as the Bull Moose Party. But like, if you remember, I talked before, a lot of rural people, like farmers, had a lot of political demands that were very different from that of people in the cities. And if you recall, though they had a hard time organizing well because they're spread out, more people were farmers than living in the cities. So here we have the birth of what's known as the Populist Party, largely made up of farmers in the South and the West in the 1890s, called for silver-based money supply. Remember, we talked about that before. They wanted more currency because they felt that if the dollar was backed by gold, the banks could manipulate it and they would enrich themselves at their loss. They thought of the economy as a zero-sum game. If someone's winning, I'm losing. They also called for government storage houses for grain. So it was very expensive to store a lot of what they grew, and they felt that it was the government's job to store these things. And that's something that had never really been done in America before, because you have to remember, American federal government didn't do things like that. For the most part, they did the mail, they had the Army and the Navy. That was it. And they didn't have anything to do with like storing your product so that until you're ready to sell it. But a lot of countries throughout the world, all the way back to like 4,000 years ago, like ancient Mesopotamia, it was usually the governments who would store grain. However, when they stored it, they kept it. They didn't give it back unless they had to. And government ownership of the railroads. They wanted to federalize the railroads. They wanted to take it away from private companies.
My grandmother worked for a railroad.
My wife's great grandmother, she's 96, and she still collects on railroad retirement. So yeah, I mean, so she's been collecting for a long time.
Oh my gosh.
Wait,
She
hold
still
up.
does.
Yeah,
Railroad retirement? What's that?
it's
So-
pretty good.
So my grandfather used to work on the railroad, right?
Mhm.
And so whenever he retired, like, they pay you a ton of money.
Yeah, it's usually better than a lot of other retirements,
Oh my
like
gosh,
some
yeah,
some
and
businesses.
My grandmother banks, like, she was a principal for like
Hmm.
a long time. And so she got that retirement, and then she got another job. She's a college professor now, and she's like 70 something, and then she has my grandfather's railroad retirement.
That's the thing about that's why a lot of people in education try to game the system. I think it's something like the top 3 years that you work in education is what your retirement's going to be based on. So that's why a lot of people, they'll try to get into like a high level position at least for a little while, and then they'll go back to teaching until they retire. So it's one of those things.
Yeah, that's what my aunt did, and she's now 85 and gets good retirement from being a principal and a teacher. And she was also she's Cuban, and so she was a bilingual teacher, which was also very helpful.
Mm.
So she
Yeah, my grandmother taught special ed in like
oh wow.
Highland Park.
Oh,
She also taught, so before she did that, she taught at a school for deaf people.
Mhm.
Because she's very, very, very fluent in sign language. But yeah, she taught special ed at Highland Park High School for years and years, and then she moved to Bullard. So she obviously got paid more at Highland Park than she did at Bullard, because Highland Park, rich people. Like legitimately, rich people would send their kids there. It was like $4,000 to go if you weren't living in the district, and if you live in Highland Park, you have to be rich because
well, that's
land
not
there.
even close to EDCA tuition, so that's
Yeah.
good.
But I mean,
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, we poured now.
That's all right. Hey, all right. So back to the railroad. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing a movement to where American people are calling for things that at the time were being called socialist. And yeah, if a government owns a private business's thing, it is a form of socialist policy. So this is pretty unpopular with people who weren't farmers, right? And so the Populist Party will never have a president that takes office. They will have some people who will make it into Congress, but the party will eventually die out. However, a lot of the policies that it wants to have happen will happen, and we'll see that later. So this guy here, William Jennings Bryan, we'll talk about him more later. He's going to begin as a populist and runs the Democrat presidential candidate in 1896. He's going to be somebody who's going to be very big as far as the Democrat Party for a long time, because he's going to really represent kind of like the evangelical movement within the Democrat Party. So we'll talk about him later. All right, below that, I have a bullet point for the Progressive Party. We're going to visit on them later, but I went ahead and mentioned it as it is so important. So the Progressive movement will form its own party, but pretty much whenever they form their own party, you're going to have both the Democrats and Republicans saying they're more progressive than anyone. So it's going to be like a movement that everyone says that they're a part of. So it started as a movement for general reform in America, as we mentioned, and would form its own party in 1912 after splitting from the Republican Party. Founded by Teddy Roosevelt and called for workers' rights and corruption in both government and business. But third parties never win. Third parties, usually the criticism is that they drain from one of the main two parties, right? Mm-hmm. So like in the last election, some people were saying that the Green Party was siphoning off the Democrats and the Libertarian parties were siphoning off the Republicans, right? Yeah. So to what degree, it's kind of up in the air.
Either of them stand for?
Well, the Green Party is kind of like a hyper socialist, environmentalist centric party, right? And the Libertarian Party is very, very individual rights, small government, right? So like the government needs to just deregulate everything. Yeah. But they're not very popular with a lot of people because different reasons. One is some people see them as extreme. Another reason is their candidates are usually kind of crazy people. And so they don't do all that well. So, all right. Let's see, 22 minutes. All right, let's go on to the next one. Boop. All right. Hey, who's this guy? I talked about him a little bit.
The big stick.
Big stick guy, yeah.
Oh, keep quiet and carry a big stick.
Fidel Castro.
No.
He's not even like
Teddy
that.
Roosevelt.
But
Yeah.
Ugly.
That's Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah.
And he's the one that said, keep quiet and carry a big stick.
That's right. He's going to be known as the first U.S. president, we'll see, that is going to kind of make America into a world power. Some people are going to say that that's great because now America is a great nation. Some people are going to say it's not so great because now America takes on what some people call imperialistic power, right? So,
Well, not really, but kind of.
Well, the thing is that there's multiple definitions for imperialism. So you have like modern imperialism, which is different from Roman imperialism. But it's nuanced. So the U.S. emerges as a world power. You don't need that date. So 1898, 1920. Wow, I made it to like its own little unit. I forgot I did this.
Wait, it's called the what?
Yeah.
U.S. emerges as a world power. Okay.
What?
You don't need to.
I'm sorry.
It's the same dates as the last one.
Speller.
You don't have to write that down, I said. It was just for me to read.
But I need a header for these notes.
But I'm starting to think we're not going to include World War I on our first test. Here's my rationale. The progress reports are supposed to come out on the 25th. Check. But that means my grades are probably going to be due before the 25th.
Oh,
Oops. So,
98 to 19.
I'm thinking we're probably going to test, not this week. but for
September
next.
22nd, right?
Let me look. Let me phone. Show me the dates.
22nd is a Tuesday. Not this Tuesday, next Tuesday.
25th is the
Ay.
Friday before the 28th.
Yeah, we're probably going to do our test on the Monday, the 21st.
Okay, because on Canvas it says the 22nd.
So what was the big thing with Archduke Ferdinand again?
It does? I said ignore Canvas. Yeah, don't worry about that. Oh, well, yeah.
What's the big deal with Archduke Ferdinand again?
He was assassinated, and he was supposed to be the heir to the throne for the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, which also was in control of a lot of Serbia at the time. And so when he was killed, this was seen as one country allowing its criminals to murder a royal person. And then Austria was so mad about it, they made demands on Serbia that Serbia couldn't do. And Russia was the sworn defender of Serbia because they're kind of related linguistically and religiously. And so Germany, who was a friend of Austria-Hungary, decided to just pull the trigger and start the war rather than lose. And to start the war, the first thing they had to do was invade France, which means they had to cross the sovereign territory of the Netherlands. And there's a lot to it, right?
The whole thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like just like the Jenga blocks all fall. I don't know. So we'll get to that. We'll get to World War I. So, all right. So this is a picture of Woodrow Wilson's. It says message to Congress. I can't read that version. Okay, but all right. So Woodrow Wilson is going to be a progressive president, as we will see. He's going to follow the footsteps of the Republican presidents who are going to be progressive at that time. He's also going to be the president of World War I. And
I thought it said President Theodore Roosevelt has a message for Congress. Is that what it said?
it says President Wilson.
Is that a W?
Yeah, Pres, P-R-E-S dot Wilson.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. All right. So we got some terms. So let's go over these terms, and then we'll see what the unit's about. And then we're going to end this lecture, and we'll talk a little bit about 9/11. We'll be done for the day. So good. Yes.
So we're gonna end with these terms.
And I'm going to talk a quick overview about what this subsection's about. So I probably should have divided these up into 3 PowerPoints instead of going away this way. They're all together. All right, so more terms to know. If you know what it means, don't write it down. Some of you might know what the difference between foreign and domestic policy is in diplomacy. You might know what annexation is, so don't write it down. So first one, expansionism. The practice of a nation state, growing and annexing new territory. So they're gobbling up other places. We will do that too. Foreign policy. Well, like Hawaii and stuff like that. The Samoan Islands, Philippines. Yeah, Alaska. But Alaska's going to be more legalistic.
Yeah,
I
we
would say.
did that because of Russia.
Yeah, whereas like Hawaii was kind of like, I don't know.
Like,
In Hawaii again? Why was that a thing? I mean, it's great. Hawaii is awesome, and it's great that it's
Well,
America's now.
we could
What?
grow tasty fruit there. And that was good.
Shaved
And we wanted to have
Shaved ice. That's what I
and
think.
snow cones.
and another reason militarily, it was a good stopping point for our Navy whenever they had to go to like Asia or the Philippines. So which is why we had Pearl Harbor, right?
Yes,
So
sadly.
and you already are. All right. So foreign policy, how nations actions relate to its relationship with other nations. So yeah, it's just how one nation corresponds with another, or at least how it planned it out. Domestic policy, the actions of a nation in response to its own local issues. So, like you could add domestic policy towards how you have towards your inner trade, regulation, race relations, stuff like that. Diplomacy, the negotiations or engagements held between nations. Check. So yeah, that's what diplomats do. They do diplomacy. Isolationism, when a nation desires to stay free from strong relationships with foreign nations. So that would be like the George Washington approach. Annexation, when a nation takes in new territory. Like how Texas was annexed, and after we had the Republic of Texas. So
Okay, so the ones that I didn't know were expansionism, foreign policy, domestic policy, and isolationism. I mean, I kind of knew what foreign and domestic were, but kind of obvious based on the purpose of it.
yeah, this is the last of the things you had to write down today.
Who called me? Unknown name called me. Gosh darn me, unknown name.
What's a example of isolationism?
George Washington's farewell address. No entangling alliances with a foreign nation. So there's different kinds of ways you can have isolationism. Well, you could say that we do not want to have treaties where we promise to defend a foreign nation. Because what if they start a war we don't want to be in? Well, if we had that treaty, we would have to join them. Or an alliance, right? Or because the idea of isolationism, it's not so much that you want to stay away from all countries. It's that you don't want to make friends and enemies so strong that you have to go to war. So an isolationist in these terms would still want to trade with other countries. They just want free trade, right? We'll trade with anybody. We don't care. It's like Iran, here's some uranium. England, here's some uranium. Which is kind of maybe dangerous in some cases. But
It's quite dangerous.
but you want to keep. You can have extreme forms of isolationism, I suppose, like North Korea, where you don't want to trade with anybody, you don't let anybody in your country. But that's not what American isolationism is. American isolationism is more like, hey, there's a war in Europe. Should we do anything about it? Nope. And that's it. So
Which war was that?
World War I and II. So
Really?
yeah,
Really
Yeah, we
did
didn't
not
do a
we-
whole lot.
we had a
We
lot of
really
people
did
who wanted to
not
stay
care.
out of it, but
As
both
soon as we
times.
got involved, it was over.
Yeah, when we
Real-
got involved, yeah, it was
But
different.
was
Yeah.
that like for a political stance to say like, oh, America is still?
Oh, you.
Well-
European.
Kind of. I think it depends on who is
Listen,
doing it.
Europeans,
Some people would,
hush,
some people
hush,
wouldn't.
What did we do after we
Determine who
lost
wins the
Vietnam?
war.
That was after we were like
Oh,
to make us seem more powerful.
We'll pick a
so-
side and figure out who we want to win the war. Okay.
well, I mean, we kind of washed our hands of Vietnam. I mean, we completely pulled out. And then after that, like just within months, like lots of Vietnamese people were rounded up and murdered, right, for helping us out.
Mhm.
So, which is one of the dangerous things about those kind of things.
Oh,
So, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of sad.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of a book right now about Mao's social revolution in China, and it was brutal. Huh?
Why did we do anything about
As
that?
it was for us.
Well, we do like it's like there has been such a strong movement to get out of Vietnam for a long time, right? A long time. And it was embarrassing when we pulled out because there was just floods of people who were allied with us jumping on our boats and helicopters to get out of there because they knew
And
if
we
they
were
stayed, they were
sorry,
going to die.
bro.
Well, we brought a lot of them. But a lot of people still got stranded. But like really, like to maintain our superiority, we just kind of like. It kind of turns out that we focus more on Russia afterwards, realistically.
I mean,
And-
we always did, really.
China did a lot to help the Vietnamese out, but Nixon did something very crafty where he kind of befriended China before we left Vietnam. And so we started trading with them and opening up relations.
Okay, Nixon gets a lot of hate, but he did like some good things for America.
Well, he was-
He did
At
some pretty
times,
shady and bad things
sometimes.
for America.
He was pretty shady,
He was pretty clever.
but like really shady too.
He was one of the most popularly reelected presidents ever, right? But yeah, his campaign definitely did some crazy stuff.
Didn't he like cause the domino effect of like a lot of stuff?
Like what?
Like he was like hiding a lot of information about Vietnam and lying to us. And
Yeah,
then
but I
causing
mean-
a domino effect of other stuff to happen about because he was lying. It was like he couldn't tell us a lot of stuff because of his lies, and so it just lies on lies on lies. And then we were all like, "What?"
That's what happens when
that's
anybody
not
lies.
any different from his predecessor Johnson, though. I mean, the whole Vietnam War was it was the thing is you had this the presidency was constantly talking about how the war could be won and how it was almost won.
And then, but it wasn't even close. Like we had people dying,
Yeah, it's because we were fighting
and of
kind of
course,
like Afghanistan. We were fighting a counterinsurgency.
I understand that we always want to make America look amazing and
Yeah.
big and stuff, and that's why he lied during Vietnam. But also, like, if
Yeah.
we needed help, I feel like we could have gotten it to make us win.
Well, a lot of people didn't know if we should even be there. So
Yeah.
it's
Why did we even know? Because it was really not
Yeah.
our association.
That's a good question.
well, I mean, some of it had to do with we were invited by like the nationalists who were trying
like,
to,
hey, do y'all need to fight in this big old war that you're gonna lose?
and
For sure.
one of our naval vessels that was too close, if I remember correctly, or a few of them were attacked by the communists. So had that. Some people would say we shouldn't have been in that part of the ocean, but we were attacked nonetheless. And some people say that it had to do with letting the communists know we were serious in Russia and China, and also it had something to do with keeping an oil supply line open. I'm not sure about that one. So yeah, I mean, I'm not defending it, but I mean, things happen for reasons, whether you like the reasons or not. But yeah, I mean, the whole country was pretty much confused, and a lot of it had to do. A lot of the motivation for a lot of people was to fight communists, because a lot of people were starting to learn just about how evil the communists actually were, like how like just the mass murders and the slave camps and starvation and all that stuff. Especially in the 70s, it's really gonna start coming out. So, and once it comes out, you're actually going to have pro-communist professors and stuff like that shut up for a little while, because they're going to be so embarrassed about all the terrible things that other communists did. But yeah, and it's right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, so people were really scared of what would happen if it expanded. So, but we are going to have a Cold War thing. Hey, we're going to go ahead and end the live stream now. Talk to you Monday? Okay, bye. So, all right.